Welcome, everyone. I just complained that I couldn't see well enough here, but I think I'm going to do okay.
Good.
I am Kathleen Deignan, CND, eager to introduce Kathleen Deignan, CND. Kathleen, I might have basked in the light of your achievements these past few days, because a few people whom I met asked me, Kay, are you going to do a presentation at the Mother House on Sunday, November the 3rd? I said, no, not me. I'm like the precursor coming to announce. Kathleen Deignan, CND, is a woman of many talents. She holds a BA in English Literature, an MA in the History of Christian Spirituality, and a PhD in Historical Theology from Fordham University. Since 2002, she has been animator for the Thomas Merton Contemplative Initiative at Iona College, New York. Kathleen joined the faculty there in 1980, and for the past 10 years, she co-convened the Thomas Berry Forum for Ecological Dialogue. For the past 51 years to the present, she has not been idle, as you can see. Kathleen has been immersed in the Schola Ministries, the publishing venue for her repertoire of sacred songs. Maybe we're going to hear one or two of them today, hopefully. Just recently, Iona College, which is so very dear to Kathleen's heart and history, has instituted the Sister Kathleen Deignan, CND, Institute for Earth and Spirit. As we can see, Dr. Deignan is well prepared to dare us to dream a new world into being. Kathleen.
Thank you, Kay, and thank you, Carl. And thank all of you, and forgive me for my poor voice today. This, I think, is my 6th or 7th opportunity to be celebrating Marguerite with all of you wonderful Canadians, whose land she originally blessed with her enormous spirit. I'm sorry, I got distracted because I just saw Lorraine Kaza, and Lorraine Kaza is one of my heroines and one of my mentors, and she used to do this, and that's probably why I'm doing it. So thank you. Prayed for you this morning. Thank you. Prayed to you this morning, actually. So anyway, it's my joy to be here. As I say, there have been 7, this is my, I think, 7th different venue, so I have absolutely no idea which talk I'm giving. And I'm hoping that you're going to be okay with that. Because mostly what I would love is if we could make this a conversation, and we could elaborate and narrate the story for our moment of Marguerite. But, well, anyway, let's compose ourselves in this place. I want to thank Carl for reminding us that the heart of Marguerite lives here, in this house, in these members of her family, all of us, in this land, beyond this land, in all the lands where that heart has taken her family, her sisters and associates. And I would love to have us celebrate and acknowledge the first peoples of this land, whom she encountered when she came here first, who first encountered her, and hopefully gave us a new model of encounter. I want to celebrate and honor all of the relations that we have in this beautiful country of yours, all our other kind. We are here this day through the strength of heaven, light of sun, radiance of moon, splendor of fire, speed and power of lightning, swiftness of wind, depth of the sea, stability of earth, firmness of rock. So may each and all of us offer the energy of this time that we're going to spend together to deepen and enhance the dream that we have been offered to dream on through our sisterhood, brotherhood, in the spirit of Marguerite. Amen. Amen. So maybe you'll hope I don't sing after that. Sorry I'm so squeaky. Well, I hope I greeted everyone properly. It's such an honor to be here, and it's been such an honor to be traveling about and meeting the sisters and associates and friends of Marguerite and not yet friends of Marguerite all over Canada. I have not had that joy of really going to different communities and somehow unfolding the story that in which I've lived my life, in which Carl has lived his life for these many years, in which so many of us have lived our lives, and which invites us to a deeper living. Because, as I want to say today, although we are celebrating the tremendous legacy of a pioneer and a founder, a city builder, an educator, a social servant, the mother of a colony, a nation builder, a new world maker, Marguerite Bourgeoys, we know that in a very real way, 400 years though it may be since her birth, she is not someone to whom we look back to recover or discover. We do not look to the past to know Marguerite. There are some persons who become so big, their stature so encompassing, their stories so profound, their great work so significant, that they are no longer simply people of the past, but they are perennial persons somehow, persons whom we look to discover. We look to the future. As a matter of fact, we hasten to try to catch up to them. And that's what I would like to just reflect on with us today. How do we, why should we hasten to catch up to Marguerite in this present moment of earth time, of world history? I think we all know and understand that we are living in a time, in some ways, very much like Marguerite's. She was living at the end of her age. She was living at the we could say, the collapse, so to speak, of medieval feudalism, a certain economic order that had sustained Europe for centuries, a certain kind of understanding of how to live on and with the land, of how to live in and with one another in the social order. All of these things in Marguerite's time were as much in crisis for her 17th century France as our 21st century world is likewise enduring, undergoing a tremendous kind of transition. We call the transition that we are undergoing the movement from the era that she and her contemporaries helped to create, which was modernity. And now that historical age, that earth era, is likewise diminishing, collapsing all around us. And so we find ourselves, quite like Marguerite, in a moment of tremendous transition, a moment of tremendous disruption. And what I've come to sense as I do my deep lexio, so to speak, my lexio divina, of the story of Marguerite is a narrative about what to do when the world is falling apart. A narrative of what to do when the world structures that are in play in one moment cannot sustain us as we move forward in this world, if we are to survive, if we are to live sustainably. You know, it amazes me that Marguerite is a contemporary of some of the most extraordinary minds and world shapers and shakers of our Western history. She is contemporary of Descartes, of Bacon, of Dante, of, well, Henry Hudson. That'd be more from my neighborhood, since I lived along the river that took his name. But she lived in a period after an enormous expansion. The expansion that happened through the technologies of developing all sorts of seafaring craft so that people could make their way to distant lands and think they were discovering them. But she lived in this period, post-exploration period, when people felt that those lands that they had come upon and their bounty and their beauty and their novelty was somehow theirs to appropriate. And so she lived past and into an age of colonization. And these world transitions, these world moments, really shaped the world that she inhabited and was born into 400 years ago. And so she was caught up, like most of the people of her era, with a new world dream. People were starting to dream a new dream about a new kind of world. And that world would not be in France, because France no longer had the vitality, no longer had the capacity to imagine the newness that she was imagining. She and the other cultural creatives that shared her time. But I want to say that I think that the story of Marguerite is about a deeper kind of journey, even than the one that she engaged in, even with her contemporaries, all of those very, very pious Catholics who were in the work of the Catholic Counter-Reformation, trying to reimagine what a Catholic, a new Catholic orientation could be, past the shattering of the synthesis of medieval Christendom in the Protestant Reformation. What was Catholicism now? What was Christianity now? After that tremendous upheaval that was not just religious, of course we know that. It became political, it became social, it became such personal conflict. And Marguerite was living in a world that was marked and scarred by all of these kinds of upheavals. And that community that she came to be sponsored by, the Company of Our Lady, the Company of Mary, this company had the vision not simply to come over to what would become New France in quest of fur, in quest of resources, in quest of timber, but another kind of quest, which we know has had a dubious other side. There is the side of the Christian community, the Christian missionary endeavor to bring the gospel to a new land. But we also know that that has had some very, very anguishing and probably as yet unremediated consequences. And yet I want to say that Marguerite did not experience the first invitation to go to New France from the lips or the invitation of the Company of Mary, who were being in some sense in collaboration with this marvelous monastery in her hometown of Troyes, the canonesses of St. Augustine of the Congrégation of Notre-Dame. You know the story. There was a prior invitation that was moving Marguerite. And so I want to suggest that maybe we could look at Marguerite in a few metaphors, in the language, in a poetics, so to speak, of a few words, to engage Marguerite, first of all, as the recipient of a gaze and a gazer. And therefore, I would love to call her an icon. And I'd love to think about how we might live into this Jubilee year with her, thinking of her as icon. Secondly, I'd love to think about her as a story, very, very deep story. Not that there is a story about her, but that she herself is a story. A deep story, an illuminating story. I'd like to think about her as if she were a dream or a dreamer, a work, a great work, or a worker. I would love to think about her as someone who has bequeathed to us a prophetic and mystical spirituality of originality. But I mean real originality, and not just in trying to capture the vitality and the beauty and the possibility of the Christian community all over again, which is what was moving her heart. But there's a deeper story and a deeper originality that I hope to share with you. So we are blessed to be in this house where her heart still lives and lives in us. I always say, I have a little prayer about this heart that I'll never forget the first time it was put into my hands when I was a young novice here. I don't want to start singing I Felt the Earth Move Under My Feet, but it was sort of like that. And there is a way that because she left us her heart, she never left us. That's a koan, or a little mantra that I have. Because she gave us her living heart, she never died. And I think we know that that heart has survived many fires. That heart has survived many catastrophes and assaults to remain with us. So it is in itself, of course, it's a relic, but it's way more than a relic. It is something profound. In the poesis of Marguerite, it is something profound. And so we live with this heart, not just among us, but beating within us. She left us as her body. I mean, every body needs a heart. And we become the living body of this living heart. We move through time. We are an ephemeral body. We are a temporal body, literally, and temporary body, as each of us moves with this heart alive in us. But the heart, as they say, lives on, and so does the body. Even though, as we know, in this moment of tremendous transition, that bodies will morph and shape, reshape, shape-shift, and come into something new. So she is our most daring pioneer. She's a form-breaking visionary for us. She's a deathless animator who's forever going before us, as I say, in history, onto new frontiers, as she did in her own moment, and usually toward wilderness, whether that wilderness is verdant or desolate. And I think we always fail to understand her vitality if we think that we have to look back to tell her story. So, you know, I think that Marguerite is the kind of story that our original ancestors in the Jesus movement and in what would become the Christian community were trying to tell about Jesus. It wasn't the story about the Jesus of history. Because for our early Christian ancestors, there was a real deep understanding that, well, first of all, we don't have the entire story of the historical Jesus. And by the way, neither do we have the entire story of the historical Marguerite. As she said, my sister begins her beautiful poetic reflection on Marguerite's life with the phrase, "So much was left to silence, it wasn't my intention." And yet, so little do we have of her direct narration, the story that she might have given us. And so we can think of her story analogous to the Jesus story. The original disciples, it wasn't on their mind to create a historical narrative of the life of Jesus, because that, they felt, was not what would save us. Rather, they labored, the creatives among them labored to tell a sacred story, a salvific story, not about a dead person, but as a living person, as a living spirit. And so if we can borrow from the language of, Christology and Jesus studies, it would be wise for us not to spend a lot of time, let me rephrase that. I think the great work of telling her story historically has largely been done. But now I think for all of us who are not professional historians, the great work for us is to begin to express a gospel, the gospel of Marguerite, the good news of Marguerite, the animating story that can capture a generation and a new generation in terms of not just her life, following her. Because I think if she was true to her own maxim of being little, humble, and poor, which I'm quite sure she was, this was not about her. This was about something greater and richer and deeper and far more original. So, in a sense, she is on a journey into the field of resurrection, whatever that profound and powerful understanding is. I would like to suggest by the time we conclude today that I think she is trying to go before us in the journey of evolution of the human to break through into our more original, authentic, potential nature. Because I think we have to admit, friends, that the human nature that we are inhabiting now at this moment is not mature enough for the crisis that we're facing in this Anthropocene, in this age of the human. So that Marguerite should come to this enormous ripeness and wisdom phase among us of being 400 years a human person, I think is provocative for us to try to imagine what kind of human would she invite us to be now? What would be her rule, as we'll see toward this, as this conversation unfolds. So, how shall we evolve? How shall we deepen this human nature of ours? And to deepen the human nature, let's just speak about what happened to her and how she experienced this moment of radical rebirth, of becoming a new human, which she does actually report in her writings. And it happened during something that might seem so, in one sense, ordinary or parochial. It happened during a procession. It happened during the Rosary procession in Troyes, as her neighbors, her townsfolk, as pilgrims from all over the environs came on this very, very special Sunday to honor the Lady, to honor Mary. And Marguerite had gotten all glammed up, gotten all ready for this procession. She was still in her youthful, I guess you'd say, enthusiasm about being a young woman. And yet she is on her way, she's going under a portal, and there is an image. One could say there is an icon, though it was a statue, of Mary. And in an instant, she reports, inexplicably, her eye caught the eye of Mary. She felt she was being gazed upon, even as she gazed. And this was the mystical transformation that Marguerite experienced, that she reports suddenly changed her whole life. She felt as if she became a new kind of human being. Now, that's like one of those St. Paul off the horse stories, right? And I think those of us who don't encounter such miraculous happenings wonder how these things happen. But please, let's just remember that the sacred image, or the image of a sacred person that gazes out to us from what we would call an icon. If we're Orthodox people, this practice of gazing upon and being gazed upon by an icon, a mediation of something greater, a mediation of our spiritual nature, is transformative. And so for all of us, any of us who have worshipped with our Orthodox friends, we know that we could spend hours in front of icons with them. That this is their mode of contemplation, that this is their transformational practice. This is the way they move from a kind of raw, if you will, crude mode of human nature to a refined Christified mode of human nature. Gazing upon, receiving the gaze of the sacred image. I mean, in one sense, it's what happened in the garden to Magdalene, wasn't it? I mean, she gazed in a sense. She looked, perhaps not carefully, thinking she had seen a gardener. And that gardener gazed back on her, and her life was transformed. But even if we are befriending our Hindu neighbors, we know that their sacred practice of transformation is this process of what they call darshan, to behold the sacred image until you become the sacred image. Now, in some sense, Mark, that happened to Marguerite in an instant. And of course, the image she became was the image of, in her life, Mary, but Mary as mediatrix of a renewed nature, a renewed human nature. And so let's just hold that metaphor of the icon, and let's move into it as we have our conversation in a moment. How might Marguerite be met, honored as icon of a new humanity for this moment? Well, I think to understand what perhaps the dimensions or the features of that new humanity would be, we need to think of Marguerite herself as a story. Not the story of Marguerite, but Marguerite the story. Marguerite, the one who is a living narrative, a living word about the potentials of human nature. The potentials of human nature to love. The potentials of human nature to be in communion, in solidarity. The potential of human nature to dream. I'm a student of Father Thomas Berry's. I had the privilege of studying with him at Fordham for 4 years, and he was my mentor. And Thomas wants to say that if we are to make our way through this critical moment, this 400th year of Marguerite's historical life, if we are to make our way as a human community into the future, we will not be able to get there unless we have a story to hold us and a story to aid us in finding our way. We need an encompassing, deep, rich story that is going to tell us what is of meaning. Help us understand where we are. Help us know what time it is. Help us be, in some sense, alert, awake to the reality of this evolutionary moment we're in, to suffering, to possibility and potential. And I want to suggest, as we continue our conversation, that Marguerite is such a deep story. And now, this is our work. Our work is to write the icon of Marguerite. You know, in the Orthodox tradition, one has to be ordained to write an icon. One has to have an ordination, great preparation, purity of the senses, of the mind, so that one is not projecting ego onto image, so that we could see true image, vrai portrait. This is something in our story that's very important to us, as we all know. I think in those slides there is one where we see what happened in our story in the 20th century. In the 20th century, we were also in a moment of tremendous transition, huge transition, particularly within the church. We had just experienced, or were in the throes of experiencing, the greatest religious, I guess you'd say, revolution, upheaval since the Middle Ages. which was the Second Vatican Council for the Catholic community. And within this congregation, there were those who had the courage to allow the only icon we thought we had of Marguerite to undergo an enormous stripping, an enormous process of being brought down to its originality. And I think you know, the women we salute, two women I guess, American Solatrice and Eileen Scott, they risked taking the only, what we thought was a portrait of Marguerite from her time on this earth, something that looked like that, and bringing it to this restorationist in New York, Monsieur Carani, who would take it and put it under X-ray and do everything and tell us, well, we think there's something under there. Whether or not we can restore it, we don't know. And so the risk was taken, and what we came to receive back, I think maybe not everybody was happy with it. It was a death portrait. Really? We gave up this beautiful image of Marguerite for the image of Marguerite in repose in her death? But you know, the more I sit with that image, I don't know about you, we all sit with it, I know, but the more I sit with it, I think, why not? She had given it all up. She had spent it. She had passed it on. It was our task now to be, in some sense, that vrai portrait. Whoever are the now people in the family of the CND. So, icons never fade, but images do. And so there's something that we need to play with this, in this paradox of image. The desire to recuperate an honest, authentic image of human love, which is what Carani said he saw in her. This was a portrait of compassion. And so, how deep does this story go? This is the question that I think each and every single one of us needs to be exploring during this Jubilee year. We've all been invited to imagine, how shall we celebrate her? And perhaps we celebrate her by becoming her the more, by becoming us the more. She's no longer an individual, any more than Jesus is. It's a corporate person now. It's men and women. It's a story that we can't say we know because it's still unfolding. It's unfolding here in North America. It's unfolding in Latin America. It's unfolding in Europe. It's unfolding in Japan. It's unfolding in the nations, in the continent of Africa. Where will it unfold next? How shall it unfold next? That's also the role, not just of Marguerite, who was literally herself an evangelist. I mean, historically, Marguerite was an evangelist. She was a gospel bearer. She was a catechist. But if she herself is a gospel, then how far out can we sound this gospel? And who shall take up the sounding of the gospel? These are marvelous questions for us, I think. And so, all of these metaphors, by the way, will come together in a moment. Marguerite the icon, Marguerite the great story, the encompassing story, the deep story of working to build a new world, an historical process. So as Father Thomas told us that we will not make it into the next iteration of Earth history, of this planetary richness, unless we are being guided by a profound wisdom story, we will also not make it to the next stage of survival unless the human is radically, radically, radically renewed. He says we need to reinvent the human at the species level. And I think Marguerite had a mystical breakthrough to that understanding in the renunciation of ego, in the renunciation of grasping, in the renunciation of the values of her moment that were so punishing to so many people and to the earth itself. So again, she goes before us. Thomas also wants to say that, Carl, I can't see that clock.
Lots of time.
Do I?
Oh, yes.
Oh.
15 minutes.
Oh, gee. That's not a lot. Okay, that's always scary to me when they say a lot of time, 10 minutes. Okay, so she is icon, I wish to say. She is icon if we write it that way, right? She is icon if we write the icon, or if we let the icon be written on our own nature. Then she becomes icon again. And then we can live in that contemplative process of gaze. I wonder if we've thought in the family of the Congregation that our contemplative style is gazing. I mean, it seemed to work for her. And as I want to show you, I think she was a great gazer. She really looked deeply into the beauty of the divine face all the time. Like Lala, that wonderful Hindu poet, Marguerite could easily have said with Lala, wherever I go, I see your face, O God. That sense of a divine encompassment. So, I want to suggest also, as you know, that she is a dreamer. We wouldn't be in this room if it weren't for gazing and dreaming and all those things that seem so useless in our very, very materialist or money-driven world. What good is dreaming? We know that modernity had to be dreamed. The world that is collapsing now all around us, in its infrastructure, in its economy, in its technologies, this petroleum civilization of ours had to be dreamed. And there were a lot of people dreaming all of those highways and byways and cars and planes and all of the things that, as they say, as General Electric will tell us, bring good things to living. All of them had to be dreamed. They hired people to dream these things up. We give people great credit if they can imagine the progress of the world to enhance the lives of human beings. And, you know, human beings it means usually. But that dream has become a nightmare in our time. And so we've got to be about dreaming another dream. So Father Thomas says we will only move forward by a reimagination of the human. And by the way, that's an inside job. That is my daily work, to reimagine how to be human. And I am so grateful to our sister who aids me in this. And to all of you, I have to say that, living in the field of the Congregation, and this family of ours aids me greatly. But to reimagine the human at the species level, in a deep story, through a process of shared dreaming. Now, that's the stage that we're at right now. We are at a stage of needing to dream a new world into being. And, you know, I think when we say dream a new world into being, whenever you employ the term dream, everybody thinks, oh, that's so nice. You know, it sounds, reverie is lovely. It's not like that, we know that, right? The dreaming of the human, as Teilhard would tell us, the groping toward maturity of the human is a suffering process. It's a bloody process. And I think so much of how Marguerite, in her dream life, of this living, waking dream that was rising up in her, to find a new, some space where the labor to raise up a new reality could happen. The dream that she had, literally, of someone inviting her into an adventure to try to do that very thing. Let's try to reestablish the early Christian community. Okay, that's going to be, that's the dream, that's the project. Let's do it all over again. And by the book, according to the Acts of the Apostles, and the ways that we might imagine that that could happen. This was her dream. It was a dream that, of course, could not be actualized and realized in the ways that she had desired. Because the cargo that all the Europeans were bringing over into this new reality was still laden with too many old forms, too many old human beings. And I don't mean people like me. I mean too many old mind states, too many old habits of relating and acting and being. We weren't, they weren't, we aren't yet new enough. We're not young enough. We're not original and fresh enough yet. I love that Francis, the Pope, says, God is the youngest. God is, what does he say? God is so young. Or God is the youngest reality there is. God is forever breathing. Worlds and worlds and worlds. This dynamism of divinity, which of course you and I are an epiphenomena of. That's what you and I are in this little moment. But anyway, that was her dream. She dreamed into the dream. She had actual dreams of her great, the beautiful one, the one that gazed upon her, graced her, blessed her, Mary, coming to her in a dream saying, go, just go. But I don't know where I'm going. I don't know how to get there. What'll I bring? Just go, just go. And so the knock comes, you know, so to speak, to her door, and the invitation is brought to her. Go. Who shall I go with? With whom shall I go? No, just go. What shall I bring with me? Don't worry about bringing anything. Just bring your balanchon. Okay. She lost it, didn't she? On the boat even. And she arrived with virtually nothing into a new reality. See, she is the story. This is the deep story. It's mythic. She has, if we read her deeply enough, she moves to the dimensionality of a mythic story. Like the great hero's journey, which, by the way, also Father Thomas says is the story that will guide us onto the new horizon of survival. And so she goes to this place. She's got one thing. I think Marguerite is also a seed. That's what I think she had in her balanchon. Do you remember we had that great thing in this room? Not too long ago, we had I animated a wild adventure of what's in your balanchon, what's in your backpack for the General Conference, I guess. And we all had to imagine, what would we be bringing on this new world-making adventure? What would you be bringing? What shall I be bringing? In my labor to lift up and raise up a new, viable world, a new human earth, everyone, everything, civilization that can take us across this rim of chaos that we are careening toward. So she gets here, and all she is able to manage is love. Visitation, engagement, service, laughter, love, grieving. You know, the human thing. The human thing, but done so deeply, in such a deeply human way. So, I leave this provocation to you for our conversation that Carl says will happen. I'm not ready, Carl. Don't get the hook yet. I want to wonder, what kind of heirloom seed is Marguerite? What is the sacred DNA that she's carrying in the seed which she is? Into this wilderness. Metaphor upon metaphor, right? Into this wilderness to let herself, like Jesus, fall into the earth and die and invest her spiritual DNA. What is her spiritual DNA? What is the garden that will spring up from the seed that I think she is? And we might imagine her to be in this time as we celebrate this birthday for the whole Jubilee year. What is this garden that she is laboring to cultivate? Now, just in case I don't have time. See, I'm a teacher, and I get 3 months to do this. I get to tell one story in 3 months, you know, for 58 minutes at a shot. And then they come back the next day, and we pick it up where we left off, but we can't do that here. So I would like to suggest to you that Marguerite, the seed, Marguerite who became in herself the garden, Marguerite who became in herself the gardener, became enraptured by the story of the garden, because she had to live in a deep story too, by her, what I would call her deep lexio of the Genesis story. Now, I'm an environmental theologian myself at this stage of my life. I teach environmental studies. I know a lot of people do not like the Genesis story. It doesn't get better than the Genesis story to me. And I think to Marguerite, I do believe that this was her primary lexio. This, I believe, is where, in terms of our biblical tradition, our scriptural tradition, I believe this is where she lived, because I've never heard it transformed into a gospel as beautifully as she did for us. So anyway, when I was first in a congregation, I don't know if this is true or if I'm making this part up. I remember being told, we do not have the original rule of Marguerite Bourgeoys, the rule she wanted us to live by. Is that true? Was that told to us? We all, it's the creative process of listening. Well, anyway, what I received was this almost a lament that, we didn't have her original rule. She had a rule for the community originally, but the bishops, the ecclesiastics wouldn't let her live this rule, wouldn't honor this rule which was itself novelty, which was itself the great hero's journey. We call it visitation, but the great hero's journey to the neighbor, the great hero's journey of love in every instance. We were told, no, you can't actually live as freely as this woman wants you to live. You can't really live as freely as this Marguerite would have you live. And so we had to wait a long time to come into that liberty that she wanted, not just for us, because remember, I think anyway, what Marguerite was up to was about way more than simply founding a religious order. She was activating a sacred movement in history. And she was its leader and pioneer in her time and place. But you know what? No, the rule is there. We've got the rule. It's in her writings. And it's not just for us. And this is the one thing that I feel that we have to say with a lot of courage in this 400th year of her birth. She's bigger than we are. She doesn't just belong to us. She belongs to, well, of course, she belongs to the church. That's why you canonize somebody, right? Then they go universal. But I want to say that she's even more than that. That she's even bigger than the church. Or at least, let's put it this way. She is for. Her love goes beyond. And that is the going beyond that I think is her continued journeying in this world and her continued visitation. May I show you the original rule, and then I'll stop? May I have a techno geek to help me do this? Or maybe I could do it myself. I don't know what that means. Annulé, that means. Okay, I speak I speak some French. I just don't speak technology French. I don't speak computing French. Okay. Are you all going to stay in your chairs? And nobody's going to come to my assistance? I want to get my other. It's right underneath. See? So easy for you. Okay, good. Let's try this. Okay. You know what, friends? I really do not have a lot to say about Marguerite Bourgeoys. This is the only thing I really want to say about Marguerite Bourgeoys. Is that she has given, she has recovered, she has discovered, she has been holding in trust for us the rule by which not she, but the great mystery would have us live. All right? So here's what she says. That's the old gaze. Where did this go now? Okay. Okay, here it is. Can you read this, my friends? The rule of this community and for everyone is the rule that God gave at the creation of the world. Okay, so all of a sudden Marguerite Bourgeoys has moved from, to me, the historical boundary to a kind of cosmic boundary. This woman is comprehending out of her limited medieval cosmology, I don't know how she did that, it was biblical cosmology, but nevertheless, wow, there is a rule that was given at the beginning, at the creation of the world. And here it is, this is the rule. You shall love God with all your heart and your neighbor as yourself. You know, I think that probably sounds quite, how do I want to say it? I'll just keep going back. That probably sounds quite familiar, and that's the problem, is that it feels familiar. You know, doesn't have the shock of the novelty. That's it. That's baseline, evolutionary program. We're talking about the amorization of the universe, so to speak, in Teilhard's words, right? What is this universe about? What's this universe for? You ask our scientific friends in their academies, and they will say, random, directionless, accidental. But if you ask a Christian or any person of profound consciousness, what is this universe about? It is about the activation of the divine labor of love, which in some way is what evolution, the evolutionary process is. Well, she doesn't just give us that one little tiny, sweet, charming, and perhaps pious remark. Look, this is her exegesis of it. This word has gone out from all the earth. Wow, this rule has gone out from the earth as evangelizer, the earth as revelatory, the earth as proclaimer. Isn't this annoying? For it is said that God will send forth divine fire, winging to the ends of the earth, that all creatures, angels, humans, animals, inanimate objects, will say, each in their own tongue, it is not we who have made ourselves, but it is God who has called us into being. The Son proclaims this. Whoever put this show together covered up Marguerite's words. The smallest creatures repeat the same in a language which is mute to humans, but heard by their Creator. This was a deep, deep contemplative awareness of Marguerite. She paid attention. She knew how to do the thing that our ancestors in the Christian tradition said was the one absolutely essential thing that we had to do if we were going to put on the mind and the heart of Christ. And the first thing was to learn how to read the book of creation. Read the book of creation. Learn how to read the book of nature, because that is the essential revelation of God. Everything else is commentary. All scriptures are commentary on that one biblical, on that one cosmic revelation. All right, she's got the little ones that she's told us about. And what do they tell her as she listens in her daily prayer? That unless its creator sustained it, it would fall back into nothingness. So, by way of conclusion, I would like to say that if I've been able to help you catch her incredible insight, her mystical sight, her capacity to gaze on creation, creation itself as icon of the sacred, to enter into something of the way she entered into the story of this unfolding, becoming earth, this universe, this divine great work then I think maybe we could understand how she might empower us to take up the great work of our moment. Great worker that she was. Simply laboring to build her houses, to train her missionaries, to go off, go out, find those who need to be held up, enabled, fostered, loved, cared for in this arduous process of becoming ever more truly human. It's only by ourselves becoming ever more truly human, being able to relate to this communion of subjects, this community that Marguerite loved and treasured, and gave to us as the rule, as our rule of life, all of us. It's only in that way will we be able to do what I think she's doing now. My final thing is I think Marguerite is a song, but I'm thinking maybe it's not the Magnificat. Maybe it's Laudato Si. Maybe this is the song now that she's singing. The canticle of creation. The canticle of the new world that we need to midwife into being. And the deep listening to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, which I think was always her work. So I thank you, and I want to give myself a hand for not going over too much. Can we do it in time?